Justin Trudeau is humiliated. The Canadian Prime Minister has had a shocking week as the leader of a government that, alongside Ukrainian President Zelensky, honoured a 98-year-old veteran who fought alongside Nazis in World War II. Yes, the optics are not good. Justin Trudeau's response to the incident has only made the situation worse, with the Prime Minister refusing to take accountability for the disaster. Sky News All-Stars Piers Morgan, Andrew Bolt and Amy Horowitz take a look into Trudeau's PR crisis and what it means for his leadership, which is currently on the brink of collapse. Whilst Ukrainian President Zelensky was undertaking his world fundraising tour, the Canadian government honoured a soldier who was later found out to have served in a Nazi unit in World War II, according to Sky News All-Star Andrew Bolt.
You've got to ask just how stupid Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Speaker of Canada's Parliament, Athey, I mean, how catastrophically, moronically stupid. They had Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky come address their parliament last Friday to plead for more help for Ukraine to fight the Russian invaders. And the Speaker said, well, guess what? In the audience is a Ukrainian Canadian who did just that in World War II. He fought the Russians, good old Yaroslav Hunka.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98.
Yes, Canada's Parliament gave Yaroslav a standing ovation, two of them in fact, and he was quite moved. You might even think, he was probably actually very surprised, because the truth is that he fought the Russians as a soldier of the Galicia Division, otherwise known as the 4th Waffen-Grenadier Division of the SS. That's the Nazi SS.
Mr. Bolt and Sky News All-Star Amy Horowitz say the mistake showed a total ignorance of history on behalf of the Canadian government, Trudeau and Zelensky, who is Jewish and was there watching the whole thing unfold.
It makes me wonder how a decision like that could have been made that would be such a gift. It shows to me a total ignorance of history for a start, and this false idea, of course, that the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah, not to push back on you, Andrew, a little bit, but from my understanding, the Galicia unit has in fact been implicated in a bunch of war crimes. I'm not necessarily saying this guy was specifically, but Galicia, I think, was in fact involved with war crimes. And more than that, Galicia was a unit that was actually volunteer. They weren't forced to do it by the Nazis. The Galicia unit is not a good look for Canada at all. And yeah, I'd like to know who did their vetting. Obviously, I'm not saying Canada did this on purpose. Obviously, it was a mistake, but a rather large one, in my opinion.
Less than a week after the incident, the House Speaker, Anthony Rota, apologised and resigned, revealed Sky News All-Star Peter Stefanovic.
The Speaker of Canada's House of Commons has resigned less than a week after praising a Ukrainian man who served in a Nazi unit during World War II. Anthony Rota praised Yaroslav Hunka as a hero last week while recognising a number of Ukrainian Canadians. The group was given a standing ovation in Parliament during a visit from the President Volodymyr Zelensky. Mr. Rota apologised for the incident after a Jewish human rights group found the 98-year-old served as a member of the 14th Waffen-Grenadier Division of the SS.
I reiterate my profound regret for my error in recognising an individual in the House during the joint address to Parliament of President Zelensky. That public recognition has caused pain to individuals and communities, including the Jewish community in Canada and around the world, in addition to survivors of Nazi atrocities in Poland, among other nations.
And whilst the Speaker took responsibility and decisive action, Trudeau has been slammed by MPs and by the public on social media for refusing to acknowledge his part in the disaster, instead placing the blame solely on the Speaker and apologising on behalf of the Canadian government.
In a few moments, I will address the House in front of all Canadians, in front of Jewish people here and around the world, and Ukrainians, to offer Parliament's unreserved apologies for what happened on Friday. The Speaker was solely responsible for the invitation and recognition of this man and has wholly accepted that responsibility and stepped down. This was a mistake that has deeply embarrassed Parliament and Canada. All of us who were in this House on Friday regret deeply having stood and clapped, even though we did so unaware of the context. It was a horrendous violation of the memory of the millions of people who died in the Holocaust, and it was deeply, deeply painful for Jewish people. It also hurt Polish people, Roma people, 2S LGBTQI+ people, disabled people, racialized people, and the many millions who were targeted by the Nazi genocide.
In a subsequent speech, the Prime Minister also blamed Russian disinformation for the disaster.
Obviously, it's extremely upsetting that this happened. The Speaker has acknowledged his mistake and has apologized. But this is something that is deeply embarrassing to the Parliament of Canada and, by extension, to all Canadians. I think particularly of Jewish MPs and all members of the Jewish community across the country who are commemorating Yom Kippur today. I think it's going to be really important that all of us push back against Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation, and continue our steadfast and unequivocal support for Ukraine, as we did last week with announcing further measures to stand with Ukraine in Russia's illegal war against it.
The opposition has been quick to condemn Trudeau, with the Conservative Party leader slamming the Prime Minister.
Justin Trudeau was responsible for inviting President Zelensky to the House of Commons to give that speech. He was responsible for making the event a success. He is responsible for the officials at Global Affairs, the intelligence services, the Prime Minister's protocol office, all of whom could have and should have asked for a complete, vetted list of every one of the people who would be in the room and in proximity of a wartime leader. Every single person ought to have been vetted for their diplomatic and security sensitivities if the Prime Minister and his massive apparatus were doing their jobs. The Prime Minister is now responsible for the biggest single diplomatic embarrassment in Canadian history. And what has he done with that responsibility? He's been hiding out at his cottage. For 3 days he's hid there instead of coming to the House of Commons and taking responsibility. There's always someone else to blame when it comes to Justin Trudeau. But here's the reality. Responsibility and power go together. If he wants the power, he has to take the responsibility and come to the floor of the House of Commons today and apologize to Jews, Poles, Ukrainians, and all Canadians. Justin Trudeau, do your job. Stop hiding. Take responsibility and apologize.
Conservative Party MP Melissa Lantsman also attacked Trudeau in the Canadian Parliament, noting his history of using the Nazi label against opponents, but unable to take responsibility for his own actions.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has never been shy to use the Nazi label against his opponents, against Canadians.
Right.
But not being able to bring himself to take responsibility for an actual Nazi is something that Canadians will not forget.
That's right.
The Prime Minister could have prevented this. He should have prevented it, and he needs to fix it. The world knows that under this Prime Minister, a Nazi was honored in this place. The question is who speaks for Canada? And if it's not this Prime Minister, isn't it time for Canadians to have one who will?
I also want to reiterate how deeply sorry Canada is for the situation this put President Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation in. It is extremely troubling to think that this egregious error is being politicized by Russia and its supporters to provide false propaganda about what Ukraine is fighting for.
Justin Trudeau in Canada is still dealing with the fallout of hosting and cheering a Nazi in the Canadian Parliament. Canada was so embarrassed, they are now extraditing the Nazi they just celebrated to Poland. We got him. This was such an embarrassing moment that Canada is now giving up the Nazi that they've been sheltering until he was the tender age of 98. Now Canada and Western officials are forced to give the funniest apology I ever heard in my life. Oops, I accidentally cheered for a Nazi, my bad. Another country apologizing is Germany for having the Germany ambassador to Canada at the event cheering a Nazi. A newly militarized Germany cheering on a Nazi. Not a good look. You have Justin Trudeau handling this as well as you expect he would. Justin Trudeau is blaming Russian disinformation for the fact that his government cheered on a Nazi war criminal. Fucking Russian disinformation tricking us into cheering for Nazis in our government. Not our fault we are collaborating with Nazis in Ukraine. The Russians tricked us. How dumb do they think we are? Told you guys the Nazis were never defeated. They was absorbed by the West.
Have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98.
And continues to support the troops today. I said it yesterday before the news actually broke, not knowing the news that was going to break. A bunch of clapping seals. They're a bunch of clapping, barking seals. They have no idea what they're doing. Oh, we're so important. Wait for the punchline for those of you who don't yet know what it is.
His name is Yaroslav Hunka.
Look it up, people.
And I was going to say he's in the gallery, but I think you beat me to that. But I'm very proud to say that he is from North Bay and from my riding of Nipissing-Temiskaming.
Not to state the obvious, he ain't from North Bay, dude. He might live there now. He ain't from North Bay.
He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you.
That's the second standing ovation. That's the second standing ovation. This is Canadian Parliament. Look at it. Oh! Let me just pause it in the montage. The 14th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS. I think that's the secret police, the Nazi secret police, or the SS, the Nazi regime. That's what it is. 14th SS Volunteer Division, Galicia. Let's just go back to hearing the clapping. I remember that name, Yaroslav Hunka. On 22 September 2023, this is from Wikipedia. Yaroslav Hunka, veteran of the division. What was that division again? I think I forgot, Bill. What was that? Oh yeah, that's right. The SS. Not even as far as I understand, a volunteer SS. Not even a conscripted soldier. A volunteer Nazi soldier. Was invited to the Parliament of Canada along with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, where they both received standing ovations from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and most other MPs. Let me correct you, Wikipedia. All other MPs. Those of you who don't know, and this is a scandal of international proportions, and I'm going to explain why in a bit. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what happened, we're going to put this story on blast. It has already picked up the attention of some big prominent voices in the, what do they call it? The American blogosphere? The American political blogosphere. Volodymyr Zelensky has been doing his North American run, asking for more money, you know, goes to American government, meets with everybody there, asks for another $24 billion. The U.S., as far as I know, as far as I understand, has now given $135 billion in aid, military assistance, or whatever else the term is. Over $135 billion. I think Canada is up to $9 billion. $9 billion from Canada. We are roughly 10 times smaller than the US, so we're still giving proportionately less than the US. The people of Lahaina have lost their homes. We still don't know how many dead children there are, last I checked. They could rebuild every last house that was destroyed in Lahaina for what I understand, $5 or $6 billion. But no, Lahaina, the victims there, you need to sit down and be quiet because Ukraine is more important than you. Ukraine is more strategically important on the international scene. You sit down, you be quiet. Here's your one-time $700 payment, and we'll get to identifying the dead children when we have a chance. Right now, we're just counting money for Zelensky. So Zelensky goes to the U.S., asks for $24 billion more dollars. Then he goes and does his hat-out routine in Canada, meeting with Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau. Oh, they're hugging each other. They're like, oh, it's such emotional. It's a family reunion. And they're saying, yeah, well, hey, Zelensky, here's some more Canadian taxpayer dollars. They had a guest of honor join Volodymyr Zelensky in Parliament on Friday, and his name was Yaroslav Hunka. I don't think many people knew who this individual was, and I guarantee you that a great many of the parliamentarians who stood there clapping like a bunch of idiot buffoon seals, just barking on demand like someone threw the little cookie. Here's your fish, parliamentarian. Clap, you barking seals. They're clapping at, the guy. Because a military hero came with Zelensky, a military hero who is still supporting the troops of Ukraine even today. Let that sink in for a second. And because these parliamentarians are idiots, and I'm using it in the actual definitional sense, they are unintelligent buffoons. They either have an IQ below 80 or they have an understanding of history below 50. They're actual idiots. They don't understand the history of World War II. I was thinking about it earlier today. It's like, everybody says the Soviets were the heroes because they fought and defeated the Nazis. The Soviet regime was responsible for the deaths, the killing of anywhere between, estimates are 32 million to 120 plus million people over their 70-year regime. The Soviets are responsible for the killing of what is widely accepted to be the acceptable estimate, over 60 million people. Killed, starved, famined, sent to Siberia, sent to camps. The Soviets are the heroes in the lore of the West because they fought the Nazis, because the Nazis were the villains, because the Nazis had the Holocaust. They were killing the Jews, gypsies, blacks. They were going for global domination. And because the Soviets defeated the Nazis, the Soviets, who were responsible for killing more than the Nazis, are the heroes. They bring out this war hero on the basis that he fought the Soviets, because the Soviets today are the enemy. These idiots do not understand history. Who fought the Soviets? The Nazis fought the Soviets. When the Nazis invaded Ukraine, they got Nazi soldiers from Ukraine. There was a whole piece, I forget where I read it now, talking about how, the Ukrainian lore views Nazis differently than the rest of the world. Because to them, they were less bad than the Soviets. That may be the case. It's conceivable that in the broader scheme of history, Hitler was bad, so was the Soviet regime. And they bring out this guy, Yaroslav Hunka, as a hero. You remember what we watched in the intro of this? A hero. He fought the Soviets, so he's a hero today. And they don't understand, they don't know, or they do. He was a Nazi soldier volunteer, from what I understand. Now you've got the entire Parliament of Canada literally giving not one, but two standing ovations to a literal Nazi. Not a Rachel Maddow, literally, to a literal Nazi. Holy shit. Like once we're getting demonetized on YouTube. Holy shit. And I said Trudeau's in big. If this is not a scandal to end the Trudeau regime, there will not be one. The problem is, it's all of them. You see these rat parliamentarians on Twitter now trying to jump ship. We didn't know who he was. They told us he was a hero. If you're an idiot and you're giving Volodymyr Zelensky a standing ovation because based on your understanding, they're the good guys this time around. Why? Because they're fighting the Soviets. They're fighting the Russians. And the Russians now are our enemy. Analogize it, you idiot parliamentarians. The Soviets were the allies because they were fighting the Nazis, and yet they were also the bad guys. Can that make sense? It's conceivable that even though it may or may not be the reality, Russia is now depicted as being the enemy, and Ukraine the hero for fighting the enemy. Analogize how the Soviets were lionized, were turned into heroes for fighting the Nazis, despite them being responsible for killing over 60 million people. These idiot parliamentarians don't know what they're clapping at. They don't understand history. They don't understand the present. And these are the people marching us into World War III. Marching us into World War III and paving the road with our taxpayer dollars to the detriment of the people these idiots were elected to represent. And this is a scandal. It's not even a scandal. It's a bloody outrage. It's a shame on Canada. And I say the Canadian government, not the Canadian people. The tragedy for the Canadian people is that we're governed by these idiots. They invited a Nazi soldier into Parliament, gave him 2 standing ovations, praised him for supporting the regime today, the Zelensky regime. And I'm separating that from the Ukrainian people, who are the victims in this. People don't understand this. The Ukrainian civilians are the innocent victims in this. Innocent victims of Russian aggression, a regional conflict, and the innocent victims of a West who will spare no Ukrainian blood for their proxy war against Russia, as long as it takes. Oh, what's that? Ukrainian regime had a big Nazi problem? You know, MSM was reporting on that 5, 6, 10 years ago. And then we're told now that they don't have a Nazi problem, that it's Russian propaganda. Oh, they've got such a Nazi problem that their heroes of today are literal Nazi soldiers. Set aside everything else that we already know. We had 338 of our members of parliament giving 2 standing ovations to a Nazi soldier. Well done, Justin Trudeau. Holy crap. And not just that, I say that's one scandal. I think Justin is not long for politics anymore, because what Justin just did right now, I would dare say red pill the world, but he just brought to the fore that entire thing that we were told was Russian disinformation. What Nazi problem? There's no Nazi problem in Ukraine. Go Google the articles. 2018, they were running these articles. 2014, there were documentaries on YouTube talking about the Azov battalion, the Nazi iconography, the far-right problem in Ukraine. And then 2022 hits, it's all a lie. Don't believe it. It's Russian propaganda. Yep, like the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. Justin Trudeau just brought back this Nazi problem to the fore of the international discourse. He basically just, like, if you watched my exclusive video for locals beforehand, he basically, like the Dane Cook joke, just took a dump in the coat room. The entire world right now is seeing that the heroes of Ukraine now are actual Nazis. When we were told that it was Russian disinformation, Russian propaganda, they don't have a far-right problem. Zelensky, the saint, the good. Putin, the bad. People now are going to realize that that's not the case, and they were lying to us yet again. I made a list over the weekend, all of the massive lies in history. They have lied to us over and over again. Weapons of mass destruction lie, 500,000 dead Iraqi children. Was it worth it? Madeleine Albright says yes. What lie today are they telling us, and how many Ukrainian civilians is it going to cost? It's going to be worth it to them. If they can get Putin out of power, if they can have their proxy war and win their proxy war and dominate Russia, it doesn't matter how many Ukrainians die, it'll be worth it for them.
Well, Canada's top officials have expressed apologies and embarrassment for the now infamous standing Nazi ovation in Canada's House of Parliament. Canada's highest-ranking general, Wayne Eyre, has been silent on the matter. According to the Ottawa Citizen, the general has declined to apologize for his standing ovation for Yaroslav Hunka, the 98-year-old member of the 14th Waffengreider Division of the SS. Grey Zone writes.
According to the reporting in 2017, Ukraine's Azov battalion published photos on their website publicizing their meeting with Canadian military officials who had arrived in Ukraine to, quote, help train the notoriously neo-Nazi infested unit.
I truly don't understand why this is so hard. I mean, there has been some follow-up. There's some suggestion that this could not have been purely an accident. I mean, I was talking about this yesterday with Spencer. At a certain point, it's not about the ceremonial stepping down of someone at the head of the organization. The question that people need answered and want accountability for is how you go to honor someone for their heroism during a war without at any point checking what war it was and what side of it they were on.
It's what you would think is basic legwork, basic research, and it's sort of a continuous reminder for me of two things. One is that most people in leadership positions in the Western world are complete idiots and very, very lazy. And
tell us how you really feel.
Yeah, I mean, like most people in power are dumb. They just are. And sometimes I think we assign too much credit and too much malice when sometimes stupidity can suffice. This is probably both. And then the second point is there has been zero skepticism of anything related to Ukraine from pretty much everyone in power too. I mean, this is like classic military-industrial complex. Ukraine good, Russia bad, Ukraine can do no wrong, they're the golden child, and we're gonna send them billions of dollars because we need them because they're so democratic and awesome. And anyone who has suggested at any point in time that there are Nazis in Ukraine that are fighting against Russia right now has been derided as pro-Putin, as pro-Russia, as anti-Ukraine. And it's this totally myopic view of the war that's so naive about the way the world works. And it's so frustrating to me. I mean, if you go back to when Tucker still had his show on Fox News, he was talking about this stuff and everyone was like, he's a Russian Putin puppet. He's a propagandist. And we're adults. Like, we should be able to approach these issues with some semblance of nuance.
Yeah, I mean, as we played a clip of this yesterday, Trudeau himself, in his apology, characterizes a certain kind of response to this event, his own mistake, his own parliament's mistake, as feeding into Putin's talking points. And he used the opportunity of apologizing for his own government's choice to applaud a Nazi to say, well, beware of Putin propaganda, like this is somehow Russia's doing, that you brought a Nazi to be honored. I was even frustrated to see some left commentators on show Majority Report, they criticized this, but then they went on to say, well, yes, the really unfortunate thing about this is that it plays into Putin's hands. I mean, at a certain point, there has to be some introspection about one's own behavior, and also this fundamental question of why it is that accidentally these Nazis keep popping up. Whether it's Jon Stewart finding out that he had just placed a medal honoring a Nazi, honoring, I don't know for what purpose, I guess maybe being a war hero, onto a Nazi, to whether it's these photographs that are being incorporated into stories in the New York Times and Washington Post that include soldiers that just so happen to have all of these Nazi-related insignia either in tattoo form or on their attire. At a certain point, you have to reckon with the reality that there is some non-trivial number of Nazis that are in Ukraine, that they keep popping up when you try to just take a group shot of a bunch of Ukrainians. And then you have to contend with the reality that some of our funding and some of our weapons are going into the hands of people who back in 2018, the government was wary enough that they slipped into an appropriations bill, a specific provision that says none of these funds should go to Nazis.
Should be simple.
Where is that caution now?
There's none. I mean, there's literally none. The Pentagon admitted a couple of months ago that there was apparently an accounting error to the tune of $10 billion in terms of weaponry that was going to Ukraine. And I don't think anybody believes that this was the result of an accounting error. To me, it seems like a convenient way for them to send $10 billion additional dollars worth of weapons to Ukraine without having to go through Congress. And we've seen this time and again throughout this entire war. We have no clear end goal. We have no clear end date of when the U.S. is going to stop involvement. It seems that, in fact, many of our leaders want to escalate the conflict. They've rejected calls from Russia to actually sit down at the table and negotiate an end. And I don't think anyone who questions, the wrapping up or the conclusion of this conflict as pro-Russia But again, let's look at the reality of the situation. We've sent, I think, $70 to $80 billion to Ukraine at this point. We've sent them tons of weaponry.
I read it yesterday. One accounting said 113 billion.
Oh, good, 113 billion.
Yeah.
And that's not pushing Ukraine over the finish line. There's not an amount of money that we can spend that is going to make them win the war.